back to another edition of Throwback Thoughts. Today, guys, we are going to be talking about Contagion. Contagion is an American pandemic thriller that came out in 2011. It's directed by Steven Soderbergh. This has become one of the most searched and sought after movies in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic that we're dealing with now. This has become one of the most searched and sought after and rewatched and re-reviewed movies. So I know I'm not breaking any new ground here, but still, I'm doing my series on older movies. I thought I'd touch on this one because it does deal with something very real that we're dealing with today. There will be some mild spoilers in this review. I'm not going to spoil everything, but I am going to be talking about some specifics. So if you haven't seen Contagion, you might want to go see that movie and then come back and see videos like this to kind of give you a refresher course on what this movie is and why 9 years later it's still just as relevant. This cast is goated. This is like one of the best, like it has to be like top 5, top 10 best casting ever. Like every single actor and actress in this movie is at the top of their game. They're all like in their own way legendary or well-known, very famous, very accomplished actors. Lawrence Fishburne, Jude Law, Matt Damon, Kate Winslet, Sanaa Lathan, Gwyneth Paltrow, Samantha Ely, Marion Cotillard. I mean, the list just goes on and on. Bryan Cranston is in this movie. So there's a woman played by Gwyneth Paltrow who comes home and then she's feeling sick and that she thinks it's just jet lag, but then a couple of days later she ends up dead. So then they find out that she was carrying a deadly pathogen, and then all of a sudden a bunch of other people start getting symptoms and people start dying, and so this becomes a huge global pandemic. This becomes a huge thing. This is a virus with a very high fatality rate, comparatively speaking. I think it has a fatality rate in like the high 20s or something by the time this movie's over with. This movie deals with the medical health response. It deals with the people that are trying to break down this virus and figure out like how it got started and how do we vaccinate against it. And then you got regular people who are dealing with this every day and how they deal with the situation, how they respond to it. This cast is goated and you have to start there. All of the performances in here are outstanding. Everybody is giving a terrific performance, and it's also one of those movies where it's so realistic that none of these actors is really going out there hunting for the Oscar. You know what I mean? You've seen those movies where sometimes there's a scene where an actor has to kind of oversell it and has to get loud or has to get emotional or has to do whatever. Like whatever he has to do, he or she has to do to oversell that scene, they're gonna do it. It's the one scene that they play when they show the movie at the Oscars or whatever. Nobody in this movie is really doing that. Everybody here is kind of methodical and restrained, relatively speaking. It doesn't mean that there's no emotion in the movie. It doesn't mean that everybody's a fucking robot or something. It's kind of a quieter study on what happens to society, what happens to people involved in this type of a situation. Take Matt Damon's character. When he finds out that his wife has died from this virus all of a sudden, he doesn't even really process the shit. Like the doctor is telling him, hey man, your wife just died. Matt Damon literally sits there and doesn't even really register what he says. He's like, yeah, right, so can I go see her or whatever? You might be tempted to look at it like it's funny, but then later on in the same conversation, he's basically screaming at the doctor trying to figure out what the hell happened to his wife. Why did this happen? And why can't you tell me what happened? The directing and the editing in this movie is probably the highlights of the movie for me outside of the performances. Steven Soderbergh, we all know he's a very talented filmmaker. In this movie, he utilizes the hyperlink narrative, which is basically when you have a lot of different storylines going on simultaneously, sometimes interwoven with each other. There are footnotes, there are flashbacks that go back and forth between the past and between the present. It speaks to the high-level editing that Steven Soderbergh was able to blend his hyperlink narrative and execute it so well, and you never at any point in this movie feel like you're lost or feel like you're bored or feel like anything like that is happening. Transitioning and the cuts are sublime. The camera work, which focuses a lot on lingering, spends a lot of time lingering on things that maybe in real life we take for granted. We take for granted the cup that we touch, the wall that we touch, the rail that we touch, touching our face. Like we take for granted a lot of those things. Camera work in this movie might linger on an elevator button, or it might linger on a table where people were just had their hands a few minutes ago. It might linger on stuff like that. It just kind of makes the virus grow in your head. It makes the virus become its own living character in this movie. More importantly, when this movie breaks down the themes of the social unrest and then the ethics that people cross in these situations, it kind of reminds me of like zombie movies. If you think about zombie movies or zombie TV shows or whatever, obviously we know that the virus that leads to people becoming zombies is deadly. We know that zombies themselves are deadly, but I would argue that's not really the point of seeing these type of stories. The real point of these stories is to see what happens to society, what happens to humanity when we're dealing with a situation like this. The people do all kinds of crazy shit, scary shit, terrible shit when they're scared, when they're desperate, when they're terrified, when they have nothing to lose. This movie really breaks down. It gets you into a couple of different situations where you look at the characters and their storylines within this movie and you kind of go, well, can you see yourself in that situation? Would you make the same call that they make? Lawrence Fishburne's character, his wife is Sanaa Lathan in this movie. He goes against the ethics of his code, of his job, and he informs her of the situation and tells her to prepare. He tells her to leave and tells her to come to Atlanta. Matt Damon is reunited with his daughter in the movie, and he and her are kind of practicing social distancing, and he's trying to keep her safe. He's immune to this virus, but he doesn't know if she is. But she is texting her boyfriend, and she really wants that human connection. And so one time, like, she goes out and she's laying on the snow with her boyfriend, and the father comes up and he's like, hey man, you got to get out of here, you got to go home. Normally we would just kind of attributed this to a father being protective of his daughter, right? Like, oh well, you can't mess with my daughter. No, he knows that this is her boyfriend or whatever, but he's just like, no bro, we can't risk it. I'm not gonna let you get my daughter sick. A lot of people will say that the girl is stupid, but to be honest, look at social media, man. People do stupid shit all the time. Like, there's people that have licked ice cream and gone to jail for it. There's people that have licked railings or licked bars on gates or something like that, tried to get it for retweets and likes. Like, that's the kind of world we live in. Kind of makes you think, were we smarter before social media? Like, this movie takes place back in 2011, which is kind of right before the hype surrounding all social media really started to take off. Were we smarter before social media? Has social media made us collectively as a society dumber? Say all that while I'm reviewing a movie on a social media platform. So don't answer this out loud. Just kind of think about it. Answer it internally, because I don't need that negative feedback right now. But definitely you can take a lot of the themes and a lot of the different stuff going on in this movie, like Jude Law. You look at the way that social media can sometimes cause panic, cause mass hysteria. Jude Law is basically stoking the flames of this pandemic so that he can make profit off of it. I'm not here to scare you about Corona, guys. We know what Corona is. More than likely, we will be okay. I'm not doing this video to panic anybody, although obviously if people are searching Contagion, it's because they want something that reminds them of what's going on right now. I'm here to remind you all that Contagion is a movie. It is worst case scenario, okay? It is certainly inspired by some real life viruses and stuff that were serious business and did kill a lot of people, but I don't think that's gonna happen with Corona. But it doesn't mean you don't think about this shit. It doesn't mean you can't keep in mind the type of things that you do to avoid panic, the things you can do to protect you and yours. This movie takes a look at it from all angles. It takes a look at it from the angle of the media, the medical responders, and the people involved in the hospitals, the nurses, to look at it from just regular people trying to survive. And again, I would argue that it's kind of like the zombie thing. It's not necessarily about the zombies. It's about what happens when people are scared, when people are desperate, and how that can be more dangerous than the virus itself. The only real issue I have with this movie is that obviously when you have a bunch of characters in an ensemble like this, not every character is going to get the attention that they deserve. And even though all of their storylines are still working simultaneously, sometimes it can feel like it's stretched a little bit thin. But I really don't have that many issues with this movie, other than the fact that maybe people will be a little bit disappointed that it doesn't have a more exciting climax or something like that. Contagion is one of the best outbreak pandemic type of movies that I've ever seen in my life. And I'm sorry that it took Corona for people to realize how great this movie is. I'm going to give this movie probably an 8.5 out of 10. I think it's that good. I think it's a really dope ass movie. One of Steven Soderbergh's best. So tell me, have you seen it? What did you think about it? Comment below, let me know. Please like and subscribe to the Superfan Show. And as always, if you like what you see, tell me how you feel and stay tuned to hear more from the Man of Steel. Peace.